I'm Tom Hunt, food writer, eco-chef and restaurateur, and I'm here today to cook from root to fruit. I'm going to be showing you a few different techniques about how I use the whole vegetable and ingredient. And I'm going to make a mushroom porridge with celeriac leaves. So, to start with, we've got our celeriac here. Usually they come without the leaves. I like to buy my roots with greens on top because they're basically a free ingredient and a kind of delicious alternative green that you can use in any recipe. So with celeriac, these are basically very similar to celery. The stalks are kind of nice and aniseedy and delicious in any stock or cut finely into a stew or anything like that. But the leaves are also great in a salad. Today, though, we're going to turn them into a kind of type of celery salt. Celery salt's traditionally made with celery leaves that are dried and blended into salt. But today I'm going to dehydrate these with plenty of salt and olive oil and then serve them on top of our mushroom porridge. So to start with, we just need to pick our leaves. When you're buying roots with the greens on, they're a really good indication that the root is very fresh. Often when you buy a root, it will come like this without its roots, and the reason for that is that they will last longer, essentially. But when you're buying them with the greens on top, you know that that was picked a matter of days ago and that it's really fresh, and that's really important, A, for nutrition, but also for this free, amazing ingredient that we get. So to start with, I'm just going to pick off the leaves onto here, and then we're going to dehydrate them in the oven. I'd recommend doing that at about 150 degrees and doing it or you could do it much slower. If you've got a dehydrator at home, use that. Or you could go slightly faster. You just might kind of crisp up the edges, which is fine too. You'll just get a bit more of that kind of carbony, caramelized flavor. Once we've picked a few leaves, I'm just going to dress them with a little bit of olive oil and plenty of salt, because I'm going for that celery salt feel. The stalks I'm going to put to one side, and I'm going to use them inside the mushroom porridge as well. Now, I'll save those for later and grab some olive oil. Now, any oil will do. There's no reason to necessarily use olive oil. It's just got a better flavor in my opinion, and it's also healthier too, as long as we don't cook it to too high a temperature, which we're not. So, plenty of salt, just sprinkled on top. This is the same way that you might make kale chips or crisps out of beetroot leaves. But I like the addition of some extra honey to sweeten them up and dry them. Now we just want to make sure that olive oil and salt is massaged into the leaves so that all the salt clings to them and they dry out beautifully. They're actually an incredible aromatic and delicious ingredient that we often don't use at all. So I'm going to spread them out so they've all got some space and air around them so they can dry nicely in the oven. And then just pop them in at 150. So I'm going to get my pan on. It's just the same way as making any normal porridge. I like to put in 1 part oats to 3 parts water. Okay, hob on. Just going to get on nice and gently to start with. Got this crazy fluted pan, which I've never used before, but it's supposed to kind of distribute the heat fast and evenly. Quite excited to try it. Okay, so really my thing is root to fruit eating, and that's wasting nothing. And it's utilizing and making the most of these different parts of ingredients that we wouldn't usually use, like we have with the celeriac leaves. But in this case, I'm going to use the top of the leek because there's nothing wrong with it. It's just like the top of a spring onion. It can be slightly more earthy in flavor, but it's really quite delicious. And cut finely, it's really beautiful. So that can be saved for a meal another day. So I'm just going to cut these nice and finely. What you'll find when you start cooking from root to fruit and using the bits that would usually go in the bin, you're cooking with essentially the kind of rougher parts of the ingredient that are often thrown away. And you might say, yeah, that's why they're thrown away. But at the end of the day, they're full of nutrition. They're actually far more flavorful, you might find, than the internal parts of the ingredient. And they're essentially a delicious ingredient. All they need is a little bit of extra love in order to kind of cook them down and refine them so they either melt into the dish or become one with the rest of the ingredients. So leeks, finely chopped. Again, these are going back into my fridge for another meal. Essentially, we're getting another meal out of every ingredient we buy, which is, I don't know, rewarding and to say the least. So leeks, like that. These are going to take a little while to melt down, so I'm going to pop them in the pan. I'm going to add the butter in as well. Today I'm kind of feeling buttery, so I'm going to go and cook this whole porridge in butter. Give it a nice kind of rich, wintry, warming taste. Nice knob of butter in there. Now I'm going to add the other base ingredients. I'm going to start with a shallot. You could use an onion, but a shallot's nice and sweet. Now, unfortunately, the outer skin of the onion isn't completely edible. It's just slightly too rough. So we're going to use that to make a stock or as a trivet under a piece of meat later on. I tend to keep all of my scraps that I really can't eat in the freezer. It's ready to use when I need to make a stock. But what I find is when you're actually cooking with really, really high quality ingredients, you don't even need a stock. I'm not going to use a stock in this porridge because these ingredients have got so much flavour. You just don't need it. So, finely slicing the shallot. I've just crossed them that way and now I'm going to chop them into a fine dice. This knife's incredibly sharp. I'm worried I'm going to have a finger off. Okay, now when you're getting to the end, it can go in. The only bit you don't want to put in is that kind of very, very end of the root. But everything else, just chop it up finely, and you'll find you don't have anything wasted at all. Okay, so shallots in. Wow, those leeks have got a beautiful, vibrant green colour now. Okay, shallots. Just going to grab a wooden spoon. Look at that, spanking new. Never been used. Christened. Can I show you the colours? Who's the best person? Kind of bright, vibrant green in there from the leeks. So I'm just going to turn that down a little bit. I don't really want to put any colour on the onions or the leeks, like you would with risotto. I mean, I'm not going to be anal about it. If we get a bit, it's fine, but it'll just make a nicer kind of plain white dish. I'm using portobello mushrooms. All of the ingredients I'm using today are seasonal, of course. At the end of the day, seasonal produce is at its peak. It's the most delicious produce you can buy and often the cheapest, which creates a budget for buying better organic food, of course. Okay. Those leeks are looking good. Turn them down again. Okay, so mushrooms, I want them to disappear a little bit, so I'm going to cut them into a fine dice. Okay, so mushrooms, just chopping them into a fine dice. If you wanted, there's no problem with doing chunks. Okay, so mushrooms finely diced. Going to pop them straight in. We want it all to melt down together a little bit, so the flavors can combine and become one. Scrape these off. Okay, mushrooms on. You can almost add more butter to that. The leeks and onions have soaked it all up already, so we want to get some butter into those mushrooms too. Cut it off. Okay. I'm going to add a little bit of salt. I like to season the dish throughout the whole cooking process. You're always tasting and adjusting as you go before the final kind of finish. Okay, so that's on. Let's check our celeriac leaves. Wow, they're done already. So that was only about 10 minutes, I think. If you can see, they're just nice and crisp. And they'll make a beautiful decoration to go on top of the porridge. Really salty and pungent and delicious. Really kind of aromatic seasoning to go on top of the porridge and give it some extra flavour. We're using really humble ingredients here, but hopefully they're going to taste so good you'll think you're eating like a king. Okay, so next up, I'm going to add a little bit of celeriac to the dish as well. We really want that celeriac to come throughout the dish, not just on top. Now, the skin on a celeriac is quite tough, and if I was making a mash, I'd consider taking it off, not wasting it, of course, making it into some crisps, deep frying it, or even baking it in the oven, just like we have the celeriac leaves. But in this case, it's really only the root at the bottom that gets quite soily that you need to hack off. The skin nearer the top is actually a little bit softer and can be eaten. So I'm going to cut off just a nice edge like that, leaving that in the fridge for later. And then just check, give it a scrub, and if there's any really kind of knobbly bits, take them off, but the rest is completely edible. Give them a wash. Now the skin can get quite soily because it is a root, just like a carrot, so it's really important you wash it properly. Now, I'm just going to cut this up again quite finely. I think it's important that we have everything kind of nice and small so it all melts together, like I said earlier. Just going to put half of this in, I think. Should be plenty. I'm only making enough for 2 people. The recipe will be available online as well with the recipe for 4. Okay, so cut them into matchsticks. Again, work on your knife skills. If you can't cut particularly finely, then it doesn't matter. Chunks are just fine. It'll just take a little bit longer to cook. Okay. Turn these along. And then just roll the knife over them into a nice dice. Like that. I'm getting beautiful smells from the celeriac now. It's all wafting up. Incredibly pungent. I think celeriac at this time of year is incredibly indulgent. It's really absolutely bouncing with flavour. Straight into the pot with everything else. That's all starting to melt together now. And get a little bit of heat under there, a bit extra, so we can get that spinning. Now the ratio of vegetables to porridge oats is quite, like, I'd say about 50-50 when you put it in. So you want kind of low bags of flavour in there. Okay, so they're all cooking down. Next, I'm going to add a little bit of garlic, and a beautiful mauve garlic, rustic and colourful, hopefully as delicious as it looks. Now with garlic, and with all ingredients really, whenever I'm cooking, I'm looking at the vegetable and working out the way that I can use it to its kind of maximum capacity. That doesn't just mean not wasting anything and trimming it carefully and cooking with thrift and kind of respect. It means thinking about how we can get the most flavour out of the ingredients as well. So with the celeriac, we've added both to the porridge, but with the garlic, if you cook it at too high a temperature, in my opinion, completely loses all of its beauty and becomes overly nutty. I mean, it reaches this kind of delicious nutty point, but then past then, and it just turns slightly acrid. So I like to add it last, and then really keep an eye on the temperature. The other thing, unlike most chefs, I haven't got time to cut down garlic into really fine, diddy little pieces. There's just no point. The chunks will melt in and give all of their aromatics and flavour to the rest of the dish without any work like that. And mushrooms and garlic, what better combination? Okay, now a little bit of thyme. Unfortunately, thyme stalks are too tough to eat, so I'm just going to add them to my stock pot for later. I'm going to put 2 stalks in this. Do follow the recipe, but really cook with your own intuition when you're making this at home. Your thyme might be more potent and stronger than what I'm using now, or it might be less, or you might like thyme more than I do. So that's in there. The other thing I like with mushrooms is plenty of black pepper. I'm going to start adding that now. Oven can actually go off. Okay. So this pot's melting down now. I'd say it's ready to cook with. Shall I come to you, Mike? And that's all kind of softened up and ready to add the porridge to. So next addition is our oats. I'm going to use jumbo oats, but use whatever porridge you can apart from ready bread. Far too fine. So as I was saying earlier, one part oats to 3 parts water is how I like my porridge. So that's slightly thin. So I'm going to fill this small cup. So 1 cup like that will do 1 generous portion. So I'm going to just do a couple in here, so we can feed 2 to 3 people. Stir that in. Get all of the butter and flavour from the vegetables into the oats. So they soften up a little bit as well and absorb that flavour before we add the water. I'm going to boil my kettle and add 3 times as much water. Might have to do this in 2 stints, but 3 times as much water. We'll do 6 cups. 2, 3. Watch out for the steam. 4. 5. I'm gonna have to add some cold water. And 6. Okay, so at this point it looks really thin, but don't worry, it's going to thicken up. And then as we add the cheese, that's going to thicken it further. So, just like porridge, you want to cook it on a nice slow temperature. I like my porridge quite well done, so I cook it for around 10 to 15 minutes. I really like to kind of show off the local produce that we have in our area. A Parmesan in this would be amazing. It would be really quite delicious. But I've decided to use a Montgomery cheddar, one of the best cheddars in the world, and incredibly flavorful and delicious used in a risotto. I've actually, quite strangely, asked for a slightly drier cheddar so that it kind of grates nicely like a Parmesan. Now, I'm going to save what you could argue would be the best part of this cheddar and cut it off for later. Now that can go in our cheese board, and the rest here, the rind, we can grate and also add to the porridge to give it extra depth and flavour. And turn this down a little bit. You only want it to be on a very kind of slow simmer. This pan is hot. Okay. Delicious and autumnal, kind of wintry porridge. And as I said, no stock necessary. Just use lots of really high quality vegetables to get that flavour into it. I'm just going to try a little bit of the Montgomery. I'm getting rather peckish with all these delicious smells. Really amazing. It's almost got a meatiness to it, a stockiness to it in its own right. It's kind of full of flavour and actually a really good replacement to a Parmesan. So it's kind of got that sourness and that really kind of flavourful savouriness too. The oats are starting to cook down. So I'm going to add in the rind of our cheddar here. I'm going to do it on a fine grater. So we get a nice kind of fine grate that will melt quickly into the porridge. Now we want loads of cheese. We don't want to make gruel. We want it to be rich and savoury and delicious. So grate whatever you can off the rind. Delicious. So that's probably a little bit greedy for 2 people, but I'm sure it'll be fine. Now the rind, I'm going to put half of it in and save half for later. Don't worry about the mold and everything, it's actually delicious, and what cheese is. It's really quite amazing. It's going to add loads of interesting flavours and depth to the porridge. So that's got another 5 to 10 minutes to slowly tick over, and then we're ready to serve. Keep stirring the porridge just like a risotto. We really want to bring all of that starch out so that we can make a really creamy and delicious risotto. Again, we want it to be slightly loose. I mean, if it's too thick and stodgy, porridge is never nice. So add a little bit of water if it's necessary. Just going to pop a little bit more in. Remember, when we add that cheese, it's going to thicken right up again. Or if the porridge is too loose, just cook it for a little bit longer until it's perfect. So the rind's melting its way into the porridge. Just before we add the rest, we're going to take it out so that it can not be a massive lump in our dish. So I'm going to remove that now. It's almost like a fondue. It's so creamy and cheesy. We want it to melt onto the plate rather than stand. Okay, so now we're going to go in for our final seasoning and cheese. I'm going to save some of this to put on top, but plonk that all on top. That's too good to not see. A massive amount of delicious cheese stirred into the porridge, melting away. It's not going to need any more butter. Okay, so now we're ready to plate our porridge. I keep calling it a risotto. It's as good, I can tell you. So just straight onto the middle of the plate. Kind of almost melts onto the plate with all of that cheese. I'm going to go for a nice big serving. I'm going to top it with some of our Montgomery cheddar rind on top. And decorate it with some of our celeriac salt leaves. These really are kind of incredibly flavorful. And the crisps kind of take it to another level. So there we have our mushroom and celeriac porridge.